Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great America Show. It's great to have you with us. Happy Monday, and thank you for spending your Monday evening with us here on the Great America Show. We truly appreciate it. The big news over the weekend, President Joe Biden diagnosed with prostate cancer. Now, Joe Biden, back in 2022, when he was in Delaware, may have virtue signaled to the world, to America, that he had been battling this cancer. Take a listen to Joe Biden back in 2022 addressing it.
And because it was a 4-lane highway that was accessible, my mother drove us, and rather than us be able to walk. And guess what? The first frost, you know what was happening? You had to put on your windshield wipers to get literally the oil slick off the window. That's why I and so damn many other people I grew up have cancer. And why can't, for the longest time, Delaware had the highest cancer rate in the nation.
So that was Joe Biden back in 2022. Was he virtue signaling? Was he telling the world, was he telling American people that he was diagnosed with cancer? Did he know for years? What was the deal? Now, the interesting thing about it is Joe Biden, as we'll say the most powerful man in the world by designation of President of the United States, went through one of the most intensive physicals that you can possibly get for 4 years, for the last 4 years. And I assume as vice president as well for the 4 years when he was with the 8 years, rather, he was with Barack Obama. So how long was this going on for? And were people covering up? Because I think that's a question, and that's something that demands an answer. Was Dr. Kevin O'Connor covering up for Joe Biden as White House physician? Now, there was a Dr. Schussman, who was on News Nation last night, and I found it particularly interesting on his timeline of when this cancer would have started, how it would have progressed. Let's take a listen.
It's very unlikely that someone could get annual checkups and not notice a PSA elevation over the past, but this is what I typically would see in a VA hospital, where a patient hasn't had medical attention in 10 years, presents to an emergency room with bone pain, and then they find that it's metastatic prostate cancer. But in the modern age of medicine, especially the fact that he was a former president, he had intensive state-of-the-art, care where we can see prostate cancer, 10 years in the past. So this is, it's very unusual to hear that someone has prostate cancer where they're annually being followed up. And the fact that we just find it at a Gleason 9 is just pretty much unheard of in this day and age of medicine. Even in the even in the inner city populations, we wouldn't see it.
So you're saying even in a medically neglected population, it would be surprising to have a surprise diagnosis with a Gleason score of 9. So you're saying that certainly as he was serving in the Oval Office, you believe that he knew that he had prostate cancer, and even potentially as he was running in 2020 before he assumed office?
Well, most likely he had prostate cancer for a long time, and the aggressive prostate cancer such as this at age 80 grows over a long period of time. I mean, usually it takes from the first diagnosis of prostate cancer to spread would take 5 to 10 years, even in the most aggressive form. It's just, to me, it seems very surprising that the first diagnosis would be a metastatic diagnosis, especially Gleason 9 cancer, without, having his PSA history. I mean, I would like him to get to release the PSA history right now to see what it was. I mean, I'm talking.
The PSA history. So that, folks, for us who aren't doctors, we did our research here, and knowing many people who have been diagnosed with prostate cancer, privy to knowing the process. The PSA is a very simple test, which will tell you if your numbers are high or you're low. And if you're high, there's something to worry about. And what this doctor said is Dr. Schussman, very pragmatic. Your PSA levels are not just going to shoot. In the course of whenever he got his last physical before he left office, less than a year ago, through the roof. And the fact that it's metastasized is something that just doesn't happen overnight. Doesn't go from your prostate to your bones. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I've spoken to many doctors since this news is broken. But the fact that it's spread beyond the prostate into the skeletal system, into the bone system, is just not something that progresses like this overnight in the prostate. So who knew what and when did they know it? And I think it's something that we're going to have to start to figure out on not just who was propping up Joe Biden and the elder abuse that they were doing to this man, but the man was sick. We knew that he had many mental lapses, but now we find out that it's far worse than that. And in my opinion, it's criminal for the people who propped him up. It's criminal for the people who knew this was going on, including the doctors. So we're going to monitor that and we're going to see. But I think we're going to start to maybe see some investigations start to happen. Now, James Comer, the head of House Oversight, who investigated the Biden family for the last 4 years, says it's now time to start looking at some of those pardons, those Autopen pardons and signatures. Take a listen to him mentioning perhaps their next investigation.
You are going and looking at who is controlling this Autopen, because Joe Biden, I mean, he's demonstrating that he doesn't have all the cognitive capabilities they had. That interview was from 2023.
Yeah, that's hard evidence. Early in the President Biden's term as president, it clearly shows that he was in significant mental decline. It questions who was actually making the decisions. So what we found is not just with the pardons he issued, but many of the executive orders that the courts are now using to Trump-proof many of the executive orders that President Trump is trying to implement to make government more efficient. Many of these executive orders, as well as the pardons of Biden's entire family as a result of our investigation, these were all signed with the Autopen. And clearly from that interview, which was many, many months prior to the heavy use of the Autopen, Joe Biden wasn't capable of making decisions. He wasn't coherent. We think we've identified who the staffers are. Jason, you all have done great work with that over at Heritage Oversight. We're going to bring everyone that we believe was involved in any role in the use of the Autopen. We're going to invite them to come in for a transcribed interview. If they want, then they will receive a subpoena and they will have a full-blown deposition. But we want to find out who was actually making the decisions in the White House during the last 9 months of the Biden administration when he was clearly in mental decline.
Comer saying exactly how it is. We need answers. Who knew what and when did they know it? Who is propping this man up? Now let's turn to some politics over in the FBI. Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, not making people happy. Kash Patel was asked in an interview with Maria Bartiromo that he sat down with Dan Bongino about how Epstein died. Very interesting, the shift in tone. Let's listen.
You said Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. People don't believe it.
Well, I mean, listen, they have a right to their opinion, but as someone who has worked as a public defender, as a prosecutor, who's been in that prison system, who's been in the Metropolitan Detention Center, who's been in segregated housing, you know a suicide when you see one, and that's what that was.
He killed himself. You want me to? I've seen the whole file. He killed himself.
Sort of a change of tune for Mr. Bongino, huh? Went on his show, his Rumble show every single day and said other things. Now it's a big shift. The American people aren't sold, but that's not the only thing that the shift has happened on. How about that assassination attempt on President Trump, the man in Butler, that still nobody knows anything about? Let's hear what Bongino has to say about him.
You know what, Maria? Kash is not kidding. We've been personally briefed extensively on every single detail, nugget, tendril of this case. One is actively in court right now, so out of respect for the case, it's probably more appropriate that I stay quiet on that. However, I'm not going to tell people what they want to hear. I'm going to tell you the truth, and whether you like it or not is up to you. If there was a big explosive there, right? Given my history as a Secret Service agent, and my personal friendship, as the director does with the president, Give me one logical, sensible reason we would not have. If you can think of one, there isn't. There in some of these cases, the there you're looking for is not there. And I know people, I get it. I understand. It's not there. If it was there, we would have told you.
Huh. Sort of interesting. Another thing that the American people find sort of interesting. Thomas Crooks was able, on July 13th, when he took that shot and hit President Trump, was able to fly a drone over the Pennsylvania fairgrounds and get aerial footage of the rally and the whole layout for the 2 hours before President Trump took the stage. He brought a rangefinder through security. He invaded law enforcement officers from several different state, local, and federal agencies for hours. He then somehow climbed up on a roof with his rifle 450 feet from President Trump, bear crawled his way to a perfect vantage point as bystanders alerted police, and he was still able to take 8 shots at President Trump. Not to mention, he parked a vehicle full of explosives near the rally. He was able to walk around the premises hours after snipers took a photo of him and labeled him suspicious. A sniper located in the second-story window was only 40 feet away from Crooks and did nothing about it. And worst of all, they let Trump take the stage after they knew Crooks was pegged as suspicious by Secret Service, taking their eye off of him. Does Dan Bongino think we're really supposed to believe that this man was just a lone shooter, a lone 21-year-old boy taking a shot at President Trump? I'm not stupid, and I don't think you guys are by any stretch of the imagination. It doesn't make sense and does not add up. To some politics here at home, folks. The House Budget Committee has passed through President Trump's big, beautiful bill, the reconciliation package. The vote is 17-16 with 4 voting president. Will now wait in the coming days where it'll head to the House floor for a full vote, hopefully passing those rhinos in New York, getting on the right side of history, passing big, beautiful tax cuts for the American people. Folks, so much going on over in the Middle East on the world stage. President Trump recently engaging with China on a trade deal over in UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, working up trillions of dollars of investments for America. Very interesting time. We may finally soon have peace in the Middle East. I want to bring in our guest today. Our guest today is Gordon Chang, author, attorney, and great American China expert, to talk about all these issues over in the Middle East and what's going on with China right now and seemingly why Xi Jinping has been so quiet.
You're still looking good.
I'm still feeling good. You know, I've got all your MyPillow products. Mattress topper, bed sheets, MyPillows, towels, slippers, blankets.
I'm interrupted this commercial to do something I've never done before. Get 2 MyPillows absolutely free on orders of $100 or more. I can't do this forever, so get on board with this great sale today. Our best-selling 6-piece bath towel sets or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Our famous standard MyPillows, only $14.98. Queens, $18.98. King size, only $1 more. Body pillows, $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase, $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bed sheet sets. Any size, any color. So go to MyPillow.com or call that number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And when you spend $100 or more, get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
Gordon, as always, it's great to have you back with us on the Great America Show. It's been far too long. I want to start with first, there's so much going on in the Middle East. We're going to get to that. President Trump just coming back from a monumental trip, securing trillions of dollars in investments for America, for the American people, for the American worker. But I want to start with first China, because China's been very, very silent on the world stage since Donald Trump won the election, number one, and number two, took office. We don't see any balloons overflying continental United States. We don't see any warplanes buzzing the Bering Strait. There's a lot of things that happened over the last 4 years, Gordon, that we're just simply not seeing anymore. Now, it may be a coincidence. What's your thoughts?
Not a coincidence, John. The Chinese have been focused on Trump because Trump is someone who can change the calculus. And Trump is doing that. He's changing the world right now, and China's reacting to it.
That's not to say that the Chinese are they are afraid of Trump, but right now Xi Jinping is got a situation which is very fragile at home, and what he's trying to do is overcompensate by taking on the U.S. in other ways. So trade, for instance, and this is going to be the battleground. But you're right. We haven't seen those provocative Chinese activities like the balloon flight and like some of the other things you mentioned. And that's because they just at this point don't feel that they want to have a fight with the president of the United States. And that's a good thing, which means that Trump is keeping the peace.
You mentioned trade. In my opinion, they're even losing on trade. Donald Trump has their banks in absolute shambles. Their real estate is in absolute shambles. Their factory workers are revolting. And this is what you and I have spoken about for the last, since I've taken over the show in, I guess, July, August of last year. We've been talking about the people of China starting to get fed up with Xi Jinping and his regime. And something like this certainly seems like they're getting to the breaking point where something may happen. And it's not going to be against America. It's going to be against Xi Jinping.
Yeah, Xi Jinping has real problems at home. First of all, he's losing control of the military, I think. That's a minority view. But when you start looking at, there's been unprecedented series of demotions and disappearances since the middle of 2023, especially in the Rocket Force, which is the branch of the Chinese military that controls almost all the country's nuclear weapons. That's not a good sign. But what was really important was Xi Jinping's number one loyalist in the military, a guy named General He Weidong, has not been seen in public since March 11th. Now, people are saying that Xi Jinping got rid of his own guy. I don't think that's the case, and we can go in that if you really want to wonk out. But the point is, I think that Xi Jinping's adversaries are now starting to demote and disappear Xi Jinping's loyalists. And if that's indeed the case, then Xi Jinping has lost control of the most important faction in the Communist Party. Now, there are problems in the economy. The economy is contracting from all that we can tell. And so that puts Xi Jinping, who's got responsibility for all of this, in the hot seat.
Yeah, but he's himself, too. He's been sort of quiet lately. You past 4 years, you'd heard him come out and say certain things at certain times, very calculated. I don't think he's a stupid man. I think his calculations are a little bit off, and I think he's coming to realize that he messed with the bull, being Donald Trump, and now he's getting the horns in. I think he's stuck between a rock and a hard place right now. You said militarily they're starting to maybe turn on him, but how about the economy there? It's been now what a lot of people don't realize is China lies about everything. They lie, they cheat, they steal. Okay. Yeah. Now, me saying this makes me ineligible to ever travel to China again, which is fine. I've been there once, and I don't plan on ever going back because I'll never make it back home here. But and imagine that, Gordon, how sad it is that we can't travel to a country if we talk bad about the leadership. But that was almost America if Donald Trump didn't win. But you have this country that lies about everything. They lie about their economic data. They lie about their real estate data. They lie about their stock markets. Everything's a lie. But how bad does it have to be, Gordon, that we're seeing now on its face just how bad it is, whether it be factory workers, whether it be real estate, or whether it be just the overall economy?
Yeah. China reported 5.4% growth for the first quarter. I think it actually contracted. And we're seeing price data, which I think is really telling for February, March, and April, which showed that the country is in a deflationary spiral. The consumer price index has now been down for 3 straight months. And the producer price index, which measures factory gate prices, is down for 31 straight months. Wow. You can't have robust growth and deflation at the same time. It is just, I suppose it's theoretically possible, but in our world, the one we actually live in, it isn't. So right now, China's economy is at a very fragile point. Property, which used to be the core of the Chinese economy, property prices are just basically collapsed. And they're not coming back because they got too much supply and they don't have enough demand. Now, that being said, Trump's interview with Bret Baier when Trump and Baier were in the Middle East, was very telling because Trump said that the reason why he came to that trade arrangement with the Chinese, which was announced a couple Mondays ago, or a Monday ago, he said, well, the Chinese was going to break. And that's probably true. But the problem is that Trump gave China a very good trade deal. They got much more out of this trade arrangement than we did. What's even worse is that the Chinese, even though it's a deal is only a week old, the Chinese have already violated it. Then they put anti-dumping duties on the U.S. of 74.9%. This is Xi Jinping challenging Donald Trump. And Trump has got to respond, because if Trump doesn't respond, the Chinese are going to continue to assault us. And by the way, it's not going to only be Xi Jinping who's going to go after us hard. It's also his good friends, including a guy named Vladimir Putin. So I think Trump has a lot on the line. This was just one more thing. Trump, I think, gave China an off-ramp on what was going to be a collision between China and the rest of the world. That is sort of American policy at its best, but it's also at its worst, because the Chinese are malicious, they're attacking us, and now's not the time to let up on them. And unfortunately, the President of the United States, being magnanimous, has let up on the Chinese, and I think we're going to find a much more difficult China to deal with, which means Trump is going to have a very hard time with Beijing.
Do you believe he let up on them because he was more worried about our stock market here? Is there a personal relationship, or do you believe he thinks that further down the road he'll actually get them?
I think that certainly, all the reporting is that Trump was concerned about empty shelves. He was concerned about the stock market. And I'm sure that those concerns played some role in Trump's decision. But I don't think that they were enough, because
Right.
Trump had been talking about empty shelves and all the rest of this for quite some time. And so I don't think that it was the determining factor. Of course, you're going to have to ask the president himself. But the point is, from what we know about what Trump was saying and doing after April 2nd, Liberation Day, when he put all the tariffs on, I think that Trump understood that this was coming. I think that he saw how serious things were in China, and he wanted to give Xi Jinping a breather. Now, this is just the way Americans think, but it is not a good approach, as I mentioned.
Why? What's his rationale behind it? China's caused so much destruction to America, to the world. What they did during COVID, just barely touches the surface of what they've done for the last quarter century. Why give them this off ramp? To me, it's totally absurd.
Well, I think he did it because he realized that China could fall apart, and he's more concerned about a chaotic China than a more or less stable one. Also because, Trump wants to make deals, and he thinks that he can do something that's good for both the Chinese and the American people. There is that sort of, very sort of generous streak in Trump. And, we see this about doing deals with people. The problem is that we Americans, and this includes Trump, don't understand the maliciousness of the Chinese regime. Right. As you point out, they killed 1.2 million Americans with COVID. Yeah. We don't know how COVID first got out into the Chinese public, but we know that once it did, Xi Jinping made deliberate decisions to spread it beyond China's borders. That's
you
7
and I know
million.
How it got out, Gordon.
It's a lab leak in all probability. But we know 100% that once this disease was out in the Chinese public, Xi Jinping, he lied about transmissibility. He told the world it was not contagious when he knew that it was. And then while he was locking down his own country, which means he thinks that lockdowns were an effective way of stopping disease. That's another story, but that's what he thought. So while he was locking down China, he was pressuring other countries to take arrivals from China without restrictions. You put those two things together, and it's clear that the spread of COVID beyond China was the result of deliberate policies. 7 million people died from COVID outside China, including 1.2 million Americans. Those people were murdered, John. And whatever we think about trade deals or whatever, We cannot allow the Chinese to think they can do that again, because they've paid no cost for murdering 7 million people, which means they'll be inclined to do it again, because we know that they are at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and other places manipulating microbes to make them weapons.
That's the thing that just out of all of it troubles me the most, is that they've never paid the price for anything that they've done. And, I truly believed before Donald Trump came into office that he was going to finally do it. And like I don't have many criticisms of President Trump. I think he's done a terrific job, and he's done an amazing job relative to what we've gotten to the preceding 46 presidents. But there comes a time where you have to either let the bully win or kick the bully in the face while he's down. And I think we've reached the point where we're sort of at a very interesting place with China. Before we move on, how do you think this concludes with China? Do you think China and America make a long-term deal, or do you think that this a long-term deal that gets America decoupled from China, or do you think this is going to be a deal that pushes America further in?
We're going to decouple because that was what Trump wants to do. And you said it before when you were talking about this. I think Trump ultimately believes we will prevail. So he was maybe willing to give China a breather. But Trump clearly wants to decouple, clearly on strategic items, as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said 3 or 4 days ago. I think it was to CNBC. We're going to see that. And the reason is there's so much trade friction and so much other friction between the United States and China that companies are seeing that they got to at least diversify out of China. So, for instance, Apple, which has been a very pro-CCP company, Tim Cook on his earnings on May 1st, I think it was an earnings call, he said, look, this current calendar quarter, more than half of America's iPhones are going to come from India. And he said that the iPads and other devices will be coming from Vietnam.
Wait, are they going to be coming from there, or they're shipping them from China to there?
They're going to be assembled in India with components probably from China and elsewhere, because it takes a long time to move Apple's supply chain, which is the most difficult to move of any company. But we are seeing even Apple is now understanding that it's got to diversify and get out of China. And other companies are seeing the same or have seen the same thing. And this, I believe, is Trump's ultimate plan. But I'd like to see a little bit more determined implementation on the part of our president. How this ends up, we know the Chinese are going to continue to violate that deal. They've already done it 3 or 4 days in the middle of last week. They were violating this deal. I mean, that's record time, even for the Chinese to dishonor their promises. But we also know that they think that, this 90-day pause, they're going to need more than 90 days. They're just going to continue to delay. And eventually Trump will get tired of this and he will have to do something. Because if he doesn't do something, the Chinese are just going to go after us on trade. And I don't think the president will find that to be acceptable. So that's my prediction. Maybe it's a little bit more hope, but I think Trump is not going to let Xi Jinping get the better of him in the long run.
Listen, if China made good products like Germans make cars, like Italians make leather and other gadgets, I would understand. But China makes junk. There's no secret about it. They cut corners on everything. They steal everything. If they made good things, Japanese making TVs, Koreans making TVs, excellent products. But when it comes to China, everything is either stolen technology with 10 cut corners or something created like just junk. So I don't understand why we wouldn't want to get out of there. Apple should lead the way and should be a great American company and get the heck out of there. I understand there's some people get mad at me, Gordon. I say there's certain things that we can't make in America. Okay. It's just the truth of the matter. There's things that we're never going to be able to make in America, whether we don't have the resources or whether it'll be too expensive for the consumer. I get that. And that's what a world economy is for. But there are things that should be moved out of China. And that to me rings like just about everything.
Yeah, well, a couple things. The trend in manufacturing is automation and AI. And that means a robot in Kentucky is as cheap as a robot in Guangzhou, which means that a lot of stuff can come back to the US. And matter of fact, New Balance is actually making sneakers and running shoes in the US. But, I understand your point. For those things that can't be made in the US or won't be made in the US, I'd like to see them made in Central America. If we stabilize those societies by bringing manufacturing to Guatemala and its neighbors, it means that Guatemalans and neighbors are not going to be trancing up through Mexico to get into the US. So, we stabilize those societies, we end up solving our migration problem, but also we solve the China problem too. Yeah. And we shorten our supply lines, which is going to be critical because in a deglobalizing world, which is turbulent, we can no longer rely on the skies and the seas to be safe venues for transportation. So let's get the stuff back into this hemisphere, if not into the United States. We can do it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'd mentioned that multiple times in the show about, and I use textiles as my example, right? You're not going to be able to make them in America. It'll cost way too much. Gildan is a company that comes to mind. They make very cheap T-shirts. $1.25 a T-shirt. There's no way in America you're going to be able to do that. You'll be paying double the price. So, I'd mentioned that, and I had so much blowback from people. Why are we propping up other people's economies? Because you have to be pragmatic and realistic. Like I said, there's certain things that you're never going to come back here to do. There's certain things Americans are never going to do. Now, the Democrats say, well, you can't get anyone in America to do that job. It's true on some, but on most, with a livable wage, people will do anything. You go to a fast food joint, right? You go to 7-Eleven, you go to Dunkin' Donuts. Those people are making minimum wage. So if you get someone to work that job, who's to say that they're not going to go work another job that'll make $3 or $4 more an hour, doing something on an assembly line? So the Democrats are saying that it's total nonsense. But I agree with you. If we can let these people grow their economy down in Central America, they won't be coming to America. People got to realize that. And I'm not saying give them billions of dollars, but
no, you don't have to give them billions. You don't have to give
Ukraine billions of dollars and got nothing for it.
You don't have to give the guys a cent. All we have to do is we got a free trade agreement with the region. It's called CAFTA-DR. Yes. The DR part of it is Dominican Republic, by the way. And all we have to do is just liberalize it a little bit, and factories will come to Central America. There's no American money going down there, but it is American business setting up shop. And that'll be good for us. And we'll be selling them stuff because people down there will have more money. So American companies will actually do better because we will be selling stuff. It's the same thing with President Trump's Saudi Arabian trip. Part of it is, he got a lot of investment. But the important part is he's got American companies selling stuff to Saudi Arabia, to these countries. And that's good for American workers.
I hear every day about the products you all wish MyPillow carried. Well, guess what? We probably do. Slippers, bathrobes, pet beds, blankets, mattresses, sleepwear, loungewear, duvets, comforters, pot holders, aprons, oven mitts, and so much more. And they're all on sale. For example, get our best-selling standard MyPillows for only $14.98. Body pillows, $29.98. 6-piece bath towels or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase, $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bedsheet sets. Any size, any color, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And I've never done this before. When you spend $100 or more, you're going to get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
Gordon, let's turn to that. Let's turn to President Trump's trip that he just arrived back home from to the Middle East. Wildly successful. The appreciation, the respect that I saw for this man halfway across the world in the Middle East is not one that I've ever seen even back here at home, which is sort of nostalgic a little bit, in my opinion. Pretty absolutely wild. Your reaction to President Trump's reception on the world stage there and how America is so back
Yeah, this was 100% victory for President Trump. Just to put this in context, Trump during his first term had historic wins in the Middle East with the 4 Abraham Accords, 2 in the Middle East, 2 in nearby North Africa. These were, he should have won the Nobel Peace Prize for it. You have Joe Biden during the 2020 campaign. He promised to make Saudi Arabia a pariah over the grisly murder of Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in 2018. And yes, America should say something about it. But the question is, should we have allowed the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians to take over the Middle East over the murder of one individual? And the answer to that is definitely not. So what we saw last week was President Trump remaking the Middle East. Sorry for being a little bit long, but I just want to put this in context. Prior to Trump's trip, prior to Trump's inauguration for the second time, China looked like it was taking over. In March of 2023, it brokered that historic deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And in July of last year, it brokered the Beijing Declaration, which was of 14 Palestinian groups uniting. It really looked like China was dominating the Middle East. Well, China is no more in the Middle East. And we saw this last week with President Trump's trip. This was really, really historic. We cemented friendships that we've had for a long time. We boxed out the Chinese and the Russians. We gave Syria a chance to become a successful society. We had all of these deals for investment into the U.S. and all of the deals for Americans to sell stuff to the region. So this was unbelievably successful.
The trillions of dollars in investments, that's coming to American companies, as you mentioned. It's going to Boeing. It's going to various companies across America. It's not the U.S. government bringing in $5 trillion, although that would be nice because we can just pay that down towards the debt, right? Or we can send everybody a stimulus check, whatever is easier, right, Gordon? Whatever's better for the American the person's pocket. Of course, I'm being facetious about the stimulus checks, but it's going towards American plants. Now, one of the companies that's getting some money is Boeing, and Boeing hasn't exactly you'd mentioned seas before, had smooth seas, no pun intended, for their air travel. But the company is completely in turmoil. You'd think you'd have an aerospace company run by an engineer. You have it run by, I think he's a lawyer or a businessman. The place is just totally upside down. Stories and stories and stories. Air Force One that President Trump ordered, unable to deliver, taking years and years. I understand it's probably the most sophisticated plane in the world to build, but there's no excuse, in my opinion. Airliners, 737 Maxes, can't seem to get it together. As a pilot myself, I don't understand how they develop something so stupid. And I think that's probably the opinion of many other people.
Well, you put your finger on it that, once the company is run by engineers, when it moved headquarters to Chicago, it put finance people in charge, and then things went kablooey.
Right. And that's the general consensus. In America right now, we had a career politician after career politician as presidents. We've had a lawyer running the Federal Reserve. And you sit here and you're like, well, there's no reason why you should wonder why things don't work, because you have the wrong people running them. It's like having a lawyer going to do surgery on someone to do a heart transplant. It makes zero sense. But nonetheless, the companies that are getting it, Boeing, I think, among one of the biggest ones. The reason I mentioned Boeing, Gordon, is because President Trump, while he was over there, is being gifted, or the Department of Justice, I should say, is being gifted a 747 aircraft once used by the Qatari government. And people are going absolutely insane. Now, I'm not entirely sure where I stand on it. Is it safe for President Trump to use? I don't know. I don't pretend to be one of these people running a Federal Reserve where I speak about things over my pay grade. But that's something for the U.S. government to decide, not the mainstream media, not the corporatist mainstream media, and not Joe Scarborough.
Well, yeah, I'm like a lot of people. I'm not happy with the gift of the 747. But
Gordon, you logged out there. You lagged out there. So just take it from the top.
Yeah. like many people, I'm not entirely happy with the gift of the 747 from Qatar. And the reason is Qatar is a very controversial country. It is a proxy for Iran. Iran often acts as a proxy for China. Qatar is trying to flood the U.S. with money. I like the idea that President Trump went to Qatar. I like it because he's trying to win Qatar away from Iran, and that's really important to strip away Iran's friends. But taking the plane is probably going to cause some heartache for him later, for President Trump later on. It's a complicated subject. It is not as bad as most critics say. It's just, I think, ill-advised at this very sensitive period in relations in the Middle East.
Let's speak hypothetically for a second. Is it just as bad, worse, or the same as shipping Iran millions and millions of dollars in unmarked cash?
Oh, well, it's clearly not that bad. We're talking
hypothetically speaking, of course.
Very different league, because that money was shipped in cash, literally, bills, which was used probably for terrorism, used to attack the United States. That was wrong on every level. And what you can generally say about President Biden's and President Obama's policies toward Iran. There's one disaster after another. President Trump, in his first term, he put Iran back in his place with the Soleimani killing. And that was a really good thing. It made Iran think twice. Iran was quiet after that. And what we saw during the Biden administration was really, really bad. There's something really bad about it that most people don't talk about. Remember that 9/11 deal that Biden came to with Iran? Biden gave clemency to 5 Iranian operatives as part of that arrangement. And he let 3 of them stay in the U.S. at a time when the U.S. government knew that Iranian operatives on U.S. soil were trying to assassinate former Trump officials, including former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, including some of his subordinates in the State Department, and including President Trump himself. This was just indefensible. Anyway.
So you mentioned, obviously there's some questionable things about Qatar, but Gordon, there's questionable things about every single country. How about America? Let's talk about us here at home, right? Our friend Tony Schaefer was working on an operation back in 2001, early 2001, where he warned the U.S. government that there was probably going to be a 9/11 style attack. There was other operations that warned that the exact 9/11 attack. Somehow Alex Jones knew exactly how 9/11 was going to play out. Okay. How about Afghanistan? What we did to Afghanistan? How about what we did to Iraq? How about what we did to Syria? So we can't sit here as Americans and point fingers and say, you guys are bad, when all America's done for the last 25 years is undermine people's democracy, destroy countries, kill our own people, possibly, and almost have a former president and presidential frontrunner assassinated twice, still not knowing who took shots at him. Still not knowing anything about this man who was a Ukraine henchman who was going back and forth to Ukraine, doing peace missions. And we sit here and we're like, well, America's holier than thou. Now, I'm not saying this towards you, but I'm saying it towards the general people who are like, well, Saudi Arabia is a bad country or Qatar is a bad country or the UAEs. I mean, you have people out there calling every Qatari, every Saudi a terrorist. That's not the truth. That's not the truth, Gordon.
Right. It's not the truth. And it's almost beside the point. And the reason is, we can talk about Saudi Arabia at the turn of the century, but we got to worry about the here and now. It's the thing like the Khashoggi murder. Yeah, it was grotesque. It was grisly. It was just, but that is some time ago. And right now we got to worry about the Chinese and the Russians taking over the Middle East. Yeah. And what President Trump did is, sometimes you have to forget what happened in the past. And I'm not saying it's nice or I'm not saying it's pretty, but it's more important for the protection of the American people and for the protection of the world that we come to terms with Saudi Arabia and not the Chinese. Because I know that if the Chinese are going to do that, there's going to be a world of hurt because we're going to see nuclear weapons that the Chinese are going to give to the Saudis like they gave them to the Iranians. And we're going to be in a world of hurt. So I'm glad that President Trump is willing to forget what happened. I mean, it's complicated, but we live in a world which isn't perfect, and we got to make decisions which don't sometimes satisfy everybody. But those are decisions that have to be made, and President Trump has made them.
So what does it mean? What does this deal mean now for the rest of the world? What does it mean for stabilization in the Middle East? What does it mean for destabilization with China and Russia, with President Trump pulling these three nations closer together to America to now push Iran out, to push China out? What does that mean for the world? And what does it mean for America?
Well, it means that potentially a volatile part of the world becomes stabilized. I'll give you an example. The president of Syria is a former militant. Actually, we had a bounty on his head. We actually detained him. He was part of Al-Qaeda. But now he's the president of Syria, and he wants to keep the Chinese out of Syria, and he wants Syria to be modeled on the United States. He's not asking for American aid. What he wants is American commerce. He wants American investment. He wants to model his government after our government. Now, one could say, well, once a terrorist, always a terrorist. But the point is, Syria now has an historic opportunity to go from being a totalitarian hellhole under the Assads, to a failed state, to now becoming a miracle. And that is because the United States can do this. Just one more point. The president of Syria, his name is Ahmed al-Shara. He said to a friend of mine 2 weeks ago, he said, I want to be like Japan or Germany. I don't want to be like Iraq or Afghanistan. What Shara was saying was that American business followed the American military into Japan and Germany. And through the miracle of business, we transformed those countries, or those countries transformed themselves. American business didn't go into Iraq and Afghanistan, and we know what the result of that is. So Shara, I think, is clearly putting his country on the right path. We ought to give him a chance. President Trump did something historic in Riyadh when he met Shara. This was really, really important. And Trump is now lifting the sanctions on Syria, which were Assad-era sanctions and really no longer make sense. He's giving that country an opportunity to become like America. That's what's at stake. And that's the reason why, although, yes, Saudi Arabia and a couple of these countries were breeding terrorists, we need to wean them away from doing that because this is what is at stake.
Yeah, a stabilized Middle East it means a stabilization for the rest of the world. And these nations around the world should understand that the more countries and nations America can pull closer to us deters our two biggest adversaries, China and Russia. President Trump speaking with Vladimir Putin earlier this morning about ending that war, and Netanyahu now says he has a plan with the hostage releases to maybe end that war over there. The notion that anyone would be against world peace and ending these wars over the Middle East is so idiotic to me, Gordon. But there are people out there who, like Senator Lindsey Graham, for example, are stoking the fire as President Trump's over there, undermining what he's doing. It makes no sense. And you've got people out there saying, well, take it to the Senate. Let the Senate make a decision on what we should do with Iran. Let the Senate make a decision on codifying a deal or treaty with Iran. In my opinion, that'd be the dumbest thing because of how many people in that Senate, Gordon, are paid by the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, well, we'll see how this one works out. But the one thing about President Trump's trip through those three countries in the Middle East was that he was and with his diplomacy with regard to Syria, he was essentially isolating Tehran. And I think that essentially what's happened is, I don't know if there's a possibility for a deal with Iran on its nuclear weapons program, but there is what President Trump is doing is he's increasing the likelihood that he'll be able to get to an acceptable outcome. Because once you break Saudi Arabia's connection with Iran, once you get Syria away from Iran, once you get Qatar away from Iran, that's a really good thing. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm saying Trump is trying to make it happen. This is really good diplomacy. We'll have to see how it works out. But I like what I'm seeing right now because President Trump is on the right course in the Middle East again in his first term and his second term.
Before we wrap up here, we'll give it the next before the end of the year. So before the turn to what are we in 2020? Before 2026, do you believe we have an end to the Russia-Ukraine fight? Do you think we have an end and a solution to Gaza and Israel? Do you think we have an end to Iran and America?
Ukraine, no. Gaza, maybe. Iran, I don't know.
Why are you pessimistic on Ukraine?
I don't think that Putin is willing to make peace. And the thing I'm concerned about, John, is that if we recognize that Russia can annex territory by force, Putin's not going to stop in Europe, and the Chinese are going to see it, and they're going to say, well, the United States agreed to a Munich-type deal, so they'll flop when it comes to Taiwan or Philippines or whatever. We got to understand that Iran, you've got Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are very close. They're working together. Russia wouldn't be in the war were it not for China. This is like a Chinese proxy war. And I know people don't want to hear this, but Munich didn't work in 1938. And I don't think that any deal that allows Russia to keep territory is going to work either.
What do you say to the people, Gordon, who say wasn't every single piece of land that was ever taken in this world taken by force?
It wasn't. There have been negotiated settlements. That's just not true. Countries have agreed to do this. If you recognize that aggression can be legitimized, you go down a very bad path. That's what happened in 1938. It's just very, very clear.
But what do you say to the people who say that the people on the side who say that Russia has the rights to that territory, to that land, to the citizens who are predominantly Russian citizens? What do you say to them?
Putin has said that Ukraine has no right to exist. So we're not just talking about Crimea. We're not talking about Donbass. We're talking about all of Ukraine. And Putin has made it extremely clear. He's been explicit. So no, the people in Ukraine do not want to be ruled by Russia. And once you start recognizing aggression by force, we're going to have so many wars. Wars spread. You start with Biden's catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan. You have Biden not being strict with Putin in February 2022. Then you have Ukraine. You have Israel. Iran thinks it can attack Israel. Then you have Pakistan with the terrorist attack in April, which leads to that conflict. Then you have China and Russia fueling insurgencies in North Africa that look like wars. Where does this stop, John? We have to stop these guys because clearly the other path of trying to work with Putin and Xi Jinping hasn't worked. It is unfortunate. People don't want to hear this, but we're at a point where if we don't impose those costs on aggressors, then they're going to continue, and we are going to have World War III. Remember, 1930s, there were separate wars around the world that merged into what we call World War II. The same thing is happening now, the same dynamic, especially because China and Russia are behind these conflicts, which means that these conflicts aren't regional, which means that every conflict has global implications. I know Americans don't want to hear this, but the point is, what is the alternative?
Well, I'm not entirely sold, and you tell me if you differ on this. I'm not entirely sold if we do go to World War III, whether it be with China, Russia, or Iran. I'm not entirely sold that Russia and China end up on the same side. I mean, they're both two evil nations on its face. I think there's probably some point in that war where one of them turns on the other. It's like you had a gun to my back the whole time.
Yeah, but they will turn on each other, but not in the here and now. And I don't worry about the 2060s or the 2070s. I worry about them now. And right now, we see a very strong and very durable partnership. And you don't have to go to war to impose costs on these guys. We have the means to stop the war in Ukraine. Sanctions. We have sanctions in place. We need to start enforcing them. No money for Putin means no war. And we can do this. We don't have to fire a shot. Reagan didn't fire a shot, but we can. We're not willing to do that. So yes, we are willing to allow bad behavior. We have been emboldening the worst elements in the Chinese and the Russian political systems by showing everybody else that aggression works. And this is an elemental lesson that we refuse to learn. We have forgotten everything about the 1930s, and we're going to pay for it.
Yeah, I'm sort of. We're going years into this thing now. I'm sort of the thing of the mindset. It's Russia and Ukraine's war. We're America. We've gotten involved in everybody else's war for the longest time, and it never ended well for anybody. Millions and trillions of dollars and billions of dollars spent on endless wars and senseless wars that are just quite honestly stupid. People die, thousands of people dead, trillions of dollars wasted. And the only people who have gotten rich off of it is Lockheed Martin and the military-industrial complex. We've got to end these senseless wars across the country, across the world.
Well, the Ukraine war would never have started except for Biden's atrocious policy.
Well, it started in 2014 under Obama.
But remember, and we turned our back on that one. Remember, we have the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. And it's in our interest, America's interest, to enforce that. And the reason is Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons. Great Britain and Russia entered into that Budapest Memorandum. And in addition to that, we gave side agreements to Ukraine to defend it. If we don't defend it, the point is countries around the world are going to see it's in their interest to develop nuclear weapons. That marginalizes our power, makes world very dangerous. So it's in our interest to make sure that Russia doesn't break apart Ukraine. Again, this is a long-term thing, but we do not want the spread of nuclear weapons around the world.
That's one thing I think we could all agree on. Gordon Chang, great American attorney, author. Gordon Chang's book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. You get it on Amazon, wherever you guys buy your books. We recommend it to you highly. You can get a Kindle version. You can get the hardcover, whatever you like to read. Gordon's Twitter, Gordon G. Chang. Is that right, Gordon?
That is right, John.
You get the last word here, Gordon. Whatever you want to sell the audience, whatever you want to tell the audience, whatever you want to give the audience, the floor is yours.
We're being assaulted by China and Russia and Iran, and they're in our country. This is not something over there. This is in our country. We have their operatives and their agents, and we better start defending ourselves. We better start removing these elements, because if we don't, we are going to be fighting a foreign enemy on our soil and sustained battles the first time since the War of 1812. And thank you so much, John, for the opportunity to talk about these things.
It's always fun, Gordon. I appreciate you coming on, and we'll talk to you soon. Gordon Chang, the Twitter is Gordon G. Chang, at Gordon G. Chang on Twitter. The book is Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Gordon, come back soon.
Thank you so much, John.
Thanks to Gordon Chang, and thank you all for being with us today here on The Great America Show. We hope to see you back here tomorrow for The Great America Show, where our quest for truth, justice, and the American way continues. We'll see you back here tomorrow, same time, same place. Till then, may God bless you, may God bless America, and may God bless the great Lou Dobbs. Have a great night, everybody.